I have to be honest, right in the beginning of this video, I will never drive for Uber or Lyft ever again. And when I say this, I get a lot of comments and questions of people saying, hey, Mark, why not? What was so bad? What were the main reasons that made you quit being a driver? And I do want to say right in the beginning that the main reason is all my kind of entrepreneurial pursuits, like making music, making YouTube videos, started to pay the bills. However, there were still a lot of reasons that were just driving me insane that I was like, you know what? Uber and Lyft is just not worth it at all anymore. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 reasons why I quit being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. Number 1, the pay. If you talk to any driver right now, this is by far the number 1 reason. I mean, hey, I could probably stop right now this video and every driver out there would be like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I don't need to hear the other 4 points, although there's a lot to this video. I don't really need to hear the other 4 points. The pay enough is so bad. Here's where things get really interesting. I did my first ever ride in January of 2015. And this is back in like the infancy days of Uber and Lyft, where a lot of people were like, hey, like, what is it like to drive? And the biggest question, as you can imagine, how much you get paid driving people around? And I used to say, about $20 to $25 an hour on average is what I made when driving in Boston. Now fast forward all the way from 2015 to this video, and when people still ask me to this day, right now, if someone asked me or texted me or commented or said whatever, hey, how much money do you think the average Uber driver and Lyft driver makes? I'd say, 20 to 25 an hour. So you're making the exact same amount of money, yet as we all know, inflation, expenses, this is something I will talk about in detail a bit later in this video, but all these different things you now have to worry about being more expensive, yet you're still only making $20 to $25 an hour. In addition, way back in the day, when I first started driving, Lyft and Uber take a cut. As you can imagine, you make money, they make money. It's kind of how it works. However, back in the day, they would take a 20% cut. So if I made $100 driving, they'd get $20, I would get $80. It was a 20-80 split. I personally thought that was fair. I mean, I know you could debate that, but back in the day, I was like, you know what? That's fine with me. You know, it's free to sign up. I don't have to spend like a monthly subscription fee or anything like that. Like, basically, I drive. They get me the clients in a sense. I look at Uber and Lyft very similar to doing sales, and that sounds kind of weird, but I will touch upon that a bit later in this video as well. But I was like, you know what? That's fine for me. Now, though, it's weird how Uber and Lyft is now taking a significantly bigger cut. So not only making less money for like the rides, or almost maybe the same amount of money, but now Uber and Lyft saying, hey, not only are you going to get less money for this ride, but we're going to take out even more money and give it to ourselves. I mean, I've heard of some places, and it's weird how this is different location to location. I've heard of some drivers being like, yeah, they take a 50% cut out of where I live, or a 40% cut out of where I live, or a 60% cut out of where I live. I'm like, that is insane. That is ridiculous, which means now you have to drive significantly more now just to make this same amount of money. You may now have to drive, let's say, I'm just making this up, back in Boston, I would drive, let's say it was a typical 4 hours, and I made $25 an hour. I made $100. Okay, cool. Now you might have to drive 7 or 8 hours, or 6 or 7 hours, or maybe double, just to make that $100 that I made in Boston. It has gotten significantly worse. And then when you factor in everything when it comes to expenses, which is something I'm going to talk about next, inflation, putting food on the table, paying your bills, everything going up, a lot of drivers are like, okay, the pay's horrible. It's not gotten any better. If anything, it's gotten worse. And they're taking a bigger cut out of my income and all this other stuff I have to deal with going up in terms of prices. It's not worth it. Number 2, hidden expenses. This immediately kind of goes back to the first point I made, and this is the former accountant in me, that if you think about it, although it sounds kind of like Captain Obvious, but this is important for this point. Remember, the goal is not to make more money, it's to have more money. I think for any business, anybody looking to just be a person, right? Your goal is to have more money in your bank account than, let's say, the day before or whatever. The problem, though, with Uber and Lyft is not only are people making less money overall, but their expenses are going up to the point where the amount you make is just that, right? At least, let's say, I'm making this up. Let's say if you're getting less money to be an Uber and Lyft driver, but the expenses went down somehow, or there was some kind of thing that you could do that lowered the expenses and all these kind of hidden fees. Not saying it's better, but at least you'd walk away with still a good amount of money. Not the case at all anymore. I mean, if you think about it, one, you're gonna have to spend money in gas. As we all know, gas prices are going up a tremendous amount. The maintenance on your car is gonna cost money. And it's kind of this odd paradox, which is very unfortunate. And it makes sense, but again, sometimes the most obvious things are the easiest to overlook, that the more you drive and the more money you make, the more money you're gonna have to spend, right? So for example, you're gonna have to get more oil changes on your car. You're gonna have to get it looked at a lot more. You might have to repair and replace your brakes a lot more. The list goes on and on and on. Another thing is, are you using your own vehicle or are you renting? If you're renting, typically on average, it does depend, and it's gone up a lot more. When it comes to renting a car through Uber and Lyft, you're looking, and again, it does depend, at about, I'd say, $200-ish to $300-ish a week. However, I know some people are spending $300 to $350 a week, which means if you're driving for Uber and Lyft, you have to spend $300 in that week, drive however many hours just to make $300, and at that point, you've only broken even. You've not made any money yet, and then anything past that is profit, of course, but that's such a huge burden on you. That's what, $1,200 a month? That's insane. Now let's say go to your own vehicle. If let's say you use your own vehicle, what if you think about it? Every single time you drive, well, guess what? That is depreciation on your own vehicle. Now, typically it does depend. I looked into this before this video, and don't quote me on this, but typically every mile you drive, on average, equals roughly about 8 cents in depreciation on your vehicle. That was the last quote I saw online. I want to say as well, though, don't quote me on that, just in case it's not the exact figure, but let's use that as just an example. Let's say in 1 year, I drive for Lyft and Uber, and I drive 20,000 miles. At 8 cents, that equals $1,600 of depreciated value on my vehicle. Typically, it's a little bit more if you factor in other things, but let's just use that just to make it easy. Well, if you think about it, let's say you stop driving for Lyft and Uber, you go to sell your car a bit later down the line, you're gonna get $1,600 less for your vehicle because of all those miles you put on driving for Uber and Lyft. So it's kind of unfortunate. I just did a video about this of how Uber and Lyft can kind of bite you in the butt even after you quit, that all those miles on your car means that not only did you make less money driving for Uber and Lyft, but now you're getting less money in the future for your car if you go to sell it. That is super, super unfortunate and super annoying. In addition, and I have talked about this in other videos, let's say if you go to a dealership to sell your car, one of the big questions they will now ask you, one of the first ones is, has this car ever been used for taxi or ride-sharing like service such as Uber and Lyft? And unfortunately, they will give you less money typically for your car than if you did not drive for Uber and Lyft. In addition, it doesn't stop there. Typically, you want to have like Febreze in your car, paper towels or napkins just in case. Some drivers buy candy and water and snacks. I'm gonna be honest, you don't have to do that, just being blunt, but some drivers do that. You typically should have an aux cord. You should definitely have a phone mount, which I will say as a side note, even if you're not driving for Uber and Lyft, you should have that anyway. But another big thing is a dash cam. I say this to a lot of drivers out there, definitely get a dash cam. That's another expense you have to incur. And then on top of all these expenses, all these things you're paying for in terms of driving for Lyft and Uber, that's lowering your bottom line. Because like I said, the goal is to have more money, not make more money. Even if you're making a good amount of money as a driver, you still have to spend all this money in these expenses. And like I said earlier, a lot of drivers are still not making that much money at all in general. And now you have all these expenses. And then on top of all of this, at the end of the day, when tax season rolls around, you now owe money in taxes because you're an independent contractor as opposed to taxes being taken out of your paycheck. And if you think about it, that can be a huge rude awakening in case you've never done something like that. So take all that money you've made as a driver, or maybe not that much, let's be honest, and then you take all this money you spent in expenses, which can be a lot. And then after all of that, you have your bottom line, and then you realize, oh yeah, taxes are not taken out of that bottom line. Now I have to take maybe a third of that, typically, which is what I suggest. But remember, I'm a former accountant, I'm not your accountant. Take a third of that, put it in savings. So now after everything's said and done, after that bottom line's there, you take a third of that, and then that is the amount that you're left with the pay being super, super low, and the expenses now being super, super high with everything considered. Number 3, no protection. This is a big one a lot of people don't think about, especially beginning drivers. Now, of course, the first 2 points are about money. The almighty dollar is the holy grail for a lot of people driving. I mean, it makes sense, right? You start driving. I mean, some people do start driving. I've heard that, let's say, are retired, and they're like, hey, it's a way to get out of the house, meet new people, kind of be social, and I get that. But for most people driving, like 99%, you're like, hey, I want to save up for a vacation. I'm trying to pay away some debt or student loans. I'm driving for Lyft and Uber to put food on the table, like I'm relying on it, so to speak, where there's a lot of different reasons. But this is a big one, ignoring the money aspect now, although kind of comes back into play with this point, and that is you don't really get a lot of protection. Statistically speaking, I know it's kind of tough to say, the more that you're on the road, the more likely you are to get into an accident. Again, sounds very obvious, but it's very easy to overlook that. And if you do get into an accident, one, like I suggest, make sure you have a dash cam just in case it's not your fault. The second thing, and I've said this before in a bunch of other videos, you typically should get rideshare insurance. It does depend how much it is. It might be anywhere from $6 to $50 extra dollars a month. And I didn't even talk about that in the whole expenses part in the last point in this video, but that's another hidden expense. If you get into an accident, it's potentially likely that one, Uber and Lyft won't give you any protection. They're supposed to when they say that, but I've heard so many comments on this channel. I've heard of so many stories of drivers saying, yeah, Uber said they would give me money, but they didn't. Lyft left me out to dry, and I had to pay for everything myself. And in addition, which makes this even worse, like say you do have car insurance, which, quick side note, if you're driving and you don't have just regular auto insurance, just get it. Like, you have to have insurance. But if, let's say, you're driving with Lyft and Uber and you don't tell your insurance company that you're driving, you get to an accident, you call them, you say, yeah, I was driving and this happened, someone hit me, it wasn't my fault, but someone hit me, and a passenger in the car because I was driving for Uber, and they're like, whoa, hold up. You were driving for Uber? I mean, we get that it's not your fault, but you didn't tell us you were an Uber driver. We're not going to cover you. And remember, and probably not surprising, insurance companies will use any excuse they can to not pay you, not cover you, not help you out. So if you don't have rideshare insurance, that's a whole other issue you do have to deal with. But another thing as well is a whole deactivation issue. This is a whole other thing. There are so many cases of drivers, like say, pulling up their app on their phone. They're relying on this income when it comes to putting food on the table, bills, et cetera, and they get this weird note saying, wait, you've been deactivated. Your account's been permanently just banned or put on hold. We're investigating an issue or something. And you're like, wait, I can't work. And then a week goes by. You can't drive for Uber and Lyft for whatever reason. Then they reactivate your account and you're like, we're sorry, it was a glitch, or there was an issue, or we resolved the issue and realized it wasn't your fault, or whatever. And you're like, wait, but why did it get deactivated in the first place? This happens way more frequently than you think. And a big thing that's kind of unfortunate is Uber and Lyft will always favor the passenger over the driver. It's super unfortunate that they do this. So let's say, and I've heard so many stories on this channel of people being like, yeah, I was driving. Me and the passenger got into a mini argument because they wanted me to wait at a store for 20 minutes. And I said, no, I'm not going to wait at this fast food place for 20 minutes or whatever. I just want to drop you off. That's, a huge hassle for me. And they went to Uber and Lyft and complained like, oh yeah, my driver was driving drunk. This is actually a real story. I've heard this story not just once, actually. A couple drivers have said this. That someone complained saying they were driving drunk. Their account got deactivated. Uber and Lyft investigated it. A week goes by and they're like, yeah, sorry, we're sorry about that. We realized the passenger was just kind of saying whatever they could to put you in some trouble, whatever. But now you're like, okay, that's great. And I'm glad I can drive again. But I just lost a week's worth of work. And in addition, a lot of drivers have told me that now they have this like odd anxiety, and it's kind of understandable, that now every time they drive, when they wake up in the morning, they're like, I hope I don't see that deactivation thing again. Because, like I said, Uber and Lyft will always favor the passenger over the driver. This is a big pro tip I do have for a lot of people driving. If you get into a minor dispute with a passenger, one, like I said, have a dash cam, just so you have some evidence. But again, remember, there is a timeline where they have to kind of investigate that evidence, where you can't drive typically. But the big thing is to contact them first. If lets you get into a minor dispute with a passenger, always contact Uber and Lyft first, saying, hey, I just want to let you know, here's what happened. I just want to give my side of the story. That way you're going almost on the offensive side. Then the defensive side, well, let's say if Uber and Lyft calls you saying, hey, we heard you were driving drunk. We heard that you did this to a passenger, you did this. And you're like, no, that's not what happened. Like, they're making it up here. And now you start kind of rambling on, you're in defensive mode, you're like, oh my God, and you're kind of freaking out. It's unfortunate that now this is something a lot of drivers have to deal with. When I used to drive in 2015, when I first started, I mean, granted, it was the infancy days, like I said, of Uber and Lyft, but I never even have heard of deactivation unless you did something horrible. I mean, unless you did something ridiculous, but I mean, if you think about it, when it comes to getting deactivated or whatever, this can be a huge hit to you. And like I said, you don't have a lot of protection. And at the end of the day, and kind of making this full circle when it comes to Uber and Lyft, their customer service is pretty bad. I'm going to be honest. I will say there have been some times I talked to Uber and Lyft and they were helpful, but they kind of take that approach where you're talking to them. You're like, hey, this issue happened. My account's deactivated. Or you didn't pay me enough. Or this happened. And they're like, yeah, we investigated it. We looked into it. We're sorry about that. We can't really say too much, but have a good day. And chat and conversation. You're like, but I need my money. I need to start driving again. There's all these little things, and it just gets so frustrating with Uber and Lyft that you really, you start driving. You think it's great. And don't get me wrong. Yes, there are benefits to driving. I've met a lot of drivers who love it. And I've said this before in other videos. It's a 75-25 split, I find. 75% of drivers hate it. 25% of drivers love it. And there are a lot of benefits. A flexible schedule, as we all know, instant cash outs. The list goes on and on and on. However, I've noticed that over the years, as a driver, you just have way less protection legally if something happens when it comes to an accident, if there's a dispute with a passenger. Uber and Lyft takes the safest road out and says, you know what? We're just going to get rid of this driver. Sorry. Number 4, only part-time. This is actually a huge one because for me, when I first started driving, I drove part-time and I was making money in other ways, other side jobs I was doing. And I love doing it part-time. I'm going to be honest, right? I was like, I go out and I drive and make a good amount of money. This is way back in the day too when I was making significantly more money than drivers are making now because this is in Boston, especially when it would snow, and I've mentioned this before. I could sometimes make close to $50 or $60 an hour when it would snow and the T, which is the public transportation in Boston, break down. Of course, a lot of people would have to get to work, so that's where I would come in, right? Here's where things get really, 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 really annoying though. The second you go from part-time to full-time, everything changes, right? And to kind of sum this up, and this is a big point I want to make, because I've noticed most of the drivers who hate driving drive full-time. And I think this is the reason why, is when you go from part-time to full-time, let's say I'm making this up, you drive 20 hours part-time, and then you go to 40 hours full-time, right? What do most people think? Well, you're probably going to make 2x the money. You're driving twice as much. That's not the case. You're making less money because you realize, oh yeah, there's only a certain amount of peak hours that you can really drive for Uber and Lyft. Now, yes, there are places like here in California, after Prop 22, that you have a minimum hourly guarantee, so there is unique situations here and there. But overall, driving part-time starts to get a lot more of a hassle. In addition, in case you didn't know, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make. And when it comes to driving part-time, if you're driving during the only peak hours and everything, you might not notice it as much. But once you start driving full-time, it gets way worse. And like I said, you think I'm driving twice as much. The good parts about being a driver are going to be 2x'd. The bad parts are going to be 2x'd. No. It's almost like going from part-time to full-time, that the good parts get only a little better. That's it. But the bad parts get significantly worse. Like I've talked before on this video, in terms of the hidden expenses. More gas, more maintenance on your car, more depreciation on your car. The list goes on and on and on. And for me, the second I went to being a full-time driver, it was super stressful. I then hated it. I think for a couple of different reasons. I brought up sales before, and I think that's the way I look at me being a driver, is like I'm a salesman. I'm selling my driving services, right? And I'm hoping to get a good deal or good situation to make money. And if you think about it, because you are an independent contractor and all these different things coming into play, because you have a flexible schedule, you have to rely 100% on that income, which can be very variable, right? It's similar to doing sales where, as opposed to having, let's say, a steady paycheck, you know you're going to get the exact same amount of money every week or every 2 weeks or month or whatever. Because you know that you're pretty much going to be covered, you don't have to worry about it. When it comes to driving, though, you're stressing out, being like, oh my God, Uber and Lyft took 60% out of my paycheck this month. Like, how am I going to pay off bills or afford food, pay off student loans? I have a kid at home, like all these different things, it can be super stressful. And like I said, when it comes to driving full time, all these negative aspects about Uber and Lyft, especially like I said, when it comes to not being protected, dealing with insurance, being worried about deactivation, all this other stuff I've talked about, you then start to worry significantly more because you're 100% relying on Uber and Lyft. And I remember when I was driving full time, it just got to the point where I'm like, you know what? This just isn't worth it anymore, driving full time. Like, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to part time. I went from part time, then full time. I'm going to revert back to part time. I'm just going to look for another job to kind of pay my bills, and then I'll drive part time. And then it hit me. Why would I get another job so I could drive part time when I just got a good job that paid me completely and I did not have to worry about all the hassle of being a driver? And that's what I did. And since then, I've not looked back, being honest. And granted, like I said in the beginning of this video, yes, certain things that I was pursuing, like music and YouTube, did take off, where now that's pretty much my main source of income. But back in the day, that was a huge revelation to me, that I'm like, if I really just get a different job, not only am I going to make more money, but I don't have to spend all this extra money being a driver. And that's what's very unfortunate. I don't want to say you have to spend money to make money, because when you sign up to be a driver for Uber and Lyft, yes, it's completely free. Most people, I feel like, have their license at least. The renting situation can be a little bit tricky, but I know a lot of people who do start to drive typically have their own vehicle. But it is very unfortunate that you have all these expenses you have to pay. For me, let's say if I went back into accounting or I went into bookkeeping, let's say if I flipped burgers here at In-N-Out, right? Which, by the way, In-N-Out I think pays like 20-ish an hour now here in California, and part-time In-N-Out workers have benefits. So it's like, wait, not only do I have to worry about like all these expenses, but I didn't even talk about health insurance, for example, on this video, which is a whole other realm, right? In terms of not being protected, you have to pay for your own health insurance and all this kind of stuff. I could just flip burgers at In-N-Out, make about $20 an hour, which is about what Uber and Lyft drivers make, and I don't have these expenses, all this kind of stuff. And especially, like I said, when it comes to driving full time, all those things are amplified, and that's when it really hit me. Why get another job so I can also drive part time when I can just do this main job? Now, don't get me wrong. I know there's a lot of people watching this video potentially saying, hey, Mark, I'm not gonna lie though, I already have a 9-to-5 job. I'm making a good amount of money. I just drive to save up for a vacation. I'm just driving because on a Friday night, I think I'd rather go out and drive and make money than, let's say, go out drinking, which is not the best for me. Those are definitely very different situations than what I'm talking about. But what I am talking about is the people who are relying and really looking at that Uber Lyft income is not a secondary source of income, but something they absolutely need to make. It just hit me. Why go crazy driving full time, wasting all this money, this stress? I remember being super stressed every day, being like, I hope I get good surges. I hope Uber and Lyft doesn't do anything messed up to me. I hope that I get these big hitting rides, because if I don't, it's going to be a huge thing. And then when it hit me being like, oh, I should get another job, that led to this huge thought of, why get another job so I can drive part-time when I can just get a whole different job that's way better? And number 5, zero transferability. This is one that I don't really ever talk about. I've talked about it here and there, and I've not really seen a lot of other YouTube channels talk about this point, or blogs. And that is this. Now, people could debate me on this, but I do stick to this, and that is this. When it comes to having Uber and Lyft, let's say on your resume, for example, so you drove, let's say, for 2 or 3 years, and you put it on your resume, there's not really a huge transferability, I find, when it comes to being an Uber Lyft driver to other careers. Almost every other job I have done, if I worked somewhere for 2 or 3 years, I could put it on my resume and kind of piggyback off that. I could say, hey, I did this, so now I'm going to get a better job. I did this, so now I'm going to get somewhere higher or better up, or et cetera, right? I find when it comes to Uber and Lyft, the transferability isn't really there. Another big thing is the upwards mobility. Now, I know some people are watching this potentially saying, well, Mark, it's a temporary job. You just do it and everything. But there are a lot of temporary jobs out there that, like I said, pay better, don't have that much expenses, and you can use it to piggyback to get a better job. You can use it, let's say, to have upwards mobility. In case you know, in terms of upwards mobility, let's say you flip burgers at In-N-Out, you then go to a shift manager, then to an assistant manager, then to, let's say, a store manager, et cetera, you can work up the ladder. There's a process to start here and get here. With Uber and Lyft, you're always here. the entire time. Whether you drive for 1 month or 5 years, you are always here. And in addition, like I said, at least like say if I like flip burgers at In-N-Out and maybe work my way up here and there with the upwards mobility, I could say, like say to another company, say, hey, here's my experience doing this, and that allowed me to get X, Y, and Z. I feel like that transfers decently well. When it comes to Uber and Lyft, I mean, maybe if you're trying to be, and I'm making this up, a truck driver, or maybe like a limo driver, or maybe like a chauffeur, maybe I could see that where they're like, hey, you do have 3 years of Uber and Lyft experience, so you know what it's like to drive people around, and you want to be a chauffeur. We're going to prefer you over somebody who's never driven for Lyft and Uber. Potentially, I could see that. So I do want to be very transparent on this video. But even so, there really is not that much transferability or upwards mobility when it comes to being a rideshare driver. And for me, looking now the big picture, I'm like, why be an Uber and Lyft driver? And yes, there are benefits, the flexible schedule, the instant cash outs, yes. But like, why be an Uber and Lyft driver where I can get a different job that could potentially propel me to get another job that pays more, doesn't have all these hidden expenses, and not only hidden expenses, but doesn't have all these things I have to pay for out of pocket, which is lowering the amount of money I walk away from. And for all these other jobs out there, I don't have to worry about having security. I don't have to worry about being protected and all this kind of stuff. What's the point of driving?